The readings today may be a little obscure, the first and second anyway, from Proverbs and then taken from the writings of Paul to the Ephesians. But I think it might be worthwhile to take a moment to understand what they are about so that we can understand the real joy, gift, treasure they have for us. That first reading is from, of course, the Old Testament, the book of Proverbs. And it speaks about wisdom. And in fact, it says, wisdom has built a house, and now wisdom invites us to a banquet. Wisdom, it is said, invites us to come in, sit down, and enjoy the feast prepared for you. Now, a little understanding of what wisdom means in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. Wisdom means not just intelligence, cleverness. It means something about faith. When the Scriptures, the Hebrew word says wisdom is this, wisdom says this, it is saying wisdom means understanding what God is doing, understanding the ways of God, understanding the power of God. So wisdom is less about intelligence and knowledge and more about insight, faith, what God is doing. Not only that, but wisdom, at least in the Scriptures of the Hebrews, is always a woman. Maybe us men better take note of that. It's always a woman who is speaking words of wisdom and calling us to say, sit back, stand and look, listen, and you'll understand. No wonder wisdom said, come to the banquet, sit at the table, and learn what God is doing. So that is what it is telling us to do. Now, I think for all of us who have some knowledge of God and some experience as we do, we understand that God is always working to bring about good. God is never silent. God is not without power. So when wisdom says, come and sit, it's saying, come and remember, God is working, even in the midst of a world marked by violence and sin and marred by evil. God is still working. God is still working to bring about good in the midst of all of that trouble. God is working to make things different, even though it may take a while. So wisdom is saying, hold on to that truth that God is working and God will work to bring about good, and that God may take time for all of that to be known to us. We don't always know it, do we? We may look back at a couple months or years and say, oh, now I see how God's plan was unfolding, or now I can see how God was working in this way to bring me to this goodness. But it may take time. It may take a lot of courage to wait, but it happens. Maybe a story might be of somewhat helpfulness in this idea of God always will bring about goodness, even though it may take some time. It was back in 1918 that a child was born of a prominent American family. It was a family we would know later in history, but at this time, 1918, it is their first child, the first child of Joe and Rose Kennedy. It is a girl, a young girl, of course, born in this family, the first named Rosemary after her mother. It soon became very apparent to both Joe and Rose that this firstborn, this young girl, has some special needs. Now, back in 1918, they would never have referred to Rosemary as a child of special needs. In those days, without some insight as we have, without some of the interventions we have known, over 100 years ago, they would merely have labeled Rosemary retarded. And they would have begun the process of finding a place to put her away. For after all, the thinking would be that this child will never be able to do anything or much. There would not be any real contributions, anything they could offer, either to a family or to a greater society. And even worse, they would see the birth of this child as a tragedy and her life as something lost, an opportunity missed, even an evil that has been visited on the family. I have not read enough about Rose and Joe Kennedy to know about this issue, about how they accepted or how they embraced this child. But I'm sure they would be people of their generation, not seeing it as any blessing, only as some evil, some harm that has come to their family. The second child is born about 3 years later. If you know the genealogy of the Kennedys, Eunice Shriver is born. Eunice does not have any special needs. Being a few years younger than Rosemary, and while Rosemary is at home, they become fast joined siblings, for they become children just playing together. Eunice, of course, early on does not notice anything wrong, different than her in Rosemary. And so they play together, they compete together, they do everything together. So it is great sadness later on, with only a few years, that Rosemary is then institutionalized, taken out of the family, removed from the family for the rest of her life, predominantly. Eunice would, of course, have contact with her, but not in the same way. And this separation, this experience of Rosemary, marked Eunice's life. So when she becomes more prominent socially and politically, and she meets more other people who have family members, persons with special needs, they share a lot of common stories, and they begin to see an understanding that they had is not adequate. What they are doing is not helpful. In fact, it is wrong. And so it is in 1968 that Eunice, along with a number of other people, established the Special Olympics. This is the 50th anniversary, which made me think of it in light of this gospel and this first reading. 50 years ago, they began an Olympics for people with special needs, at a time when it was thought they should not compete, they shouldn't run and swim and jump and do all those things. They are not capable, they are not able, and it might harm them. At a time when we thought they could achieve nothing or little, here the Olympics says, no, they can do much and achieve more. At a time when we often shut them away and isolated them from family and friends, now they have a world stage on which to compete. So a great thing happens. A good thing comes. And so we begin to change our attitude to people, persons with special needs, and see in their needs abilities. And they change us. They have a great effect on us. But more importantly, because of that, they have a better impression of who they are as persons, that they are fully capable and able to contribute, able to bring about, able to participate, able to enlighten us. That's a great change, isn't it? It does not happen easily. It takes almost Eunice's entire life before all of those things happen. But we're told in these 50 years, several million persons have come to those Olympics, found their own voice and their own abilities, and had the acclamation and affirmation of a larger society. Now that's important because God's will, God's work, again, from wisdom, is about bringing about good. It may take time to know how God is doing it. And God will always work through others, empower others to accomplish that goodness, as he did Eunice and so many with her, to have that happen. Wisdom calls me to walk in that way of insight. So it means that I have to begin to recognize God is working to bring about good even at times that are very harsh, very difficult for me to endure. They may be in my own personal life that I have to deal with the effects of some sickness or death within my family. I might fight my own addictions or compulsions. I may have to overcome some of my own emotional issues and needs or those of ones I love. I may regret things I have done or want to take back words I have said. Evil will intrude in our lives, and difficulty and hardships will touch us all. But wisdom says, come, sit at my table. Come and enjoy the rich food God has given you. And know God is bringing about goodness. it's important to know evil cannot have the last word. God's goodness is the last word. The cross told us that. It showed us that. Evil cannot triumph. Good will overcome. It may take some time, but God's goodness will overcome. That's one of the things you and I take away when confronted with those things in our own lives. And then the last is the gospel that says, yes, you need to adopt a new perspective, new eyes, new understanding, wisdom says. Come and sit and remember God's goodness. Know God's working and let God empower you. And how does that happen? With this Eucharist. This bread of life says, I will be your strength. That's why I come and you gather every week for this bread of life, this cup of blessing. God's within us, God empowering us, God reminding us, I am good within you, and within you goodness can come forth. I am there to help you endure problems, sins, failures, difficulties. I will be your strength. I will be your guide. So these readings, I think, are wonderful readings. When wisdom says, come sit and remember God is with you, working and talking and empowering you. And use this bread of life at the banquet to give you the strength you need and all that you have to continue to see the goodness of God within you.